New York Governor Andrew Cuomo is under federal investigation for allegedly giving his brother and close associates special access to COVID testing. The situation is said to have happened early in the pandemic, when the state was still battling a shortage of tests. Officials are also looking into the Democratic governor's handling of COVID-19 deaths in the state's nursing homes and accusations that he sexually harassed several women. Jimmy Vielkind has been reporting on this and joins me now. Jimmy covers New York state politics and government for the Wall Street Journal. Jimmy, great to see you. So first of all, explain these COVID testing allegations and why they're so problematic for the governor. What about them could have actually broken the law?
Well, so the allegation is that in the early days of the pandemic, when nursing home residents and basically other average New Yorkers were really struggling and found it impossible to get a test, the state's limited resources were being put on two separate tracks. And there were special tests that were given to people close to the governor, people who had access to the governor. And in one instance, people familiar with the matter tell the Wall Street Journal, CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, who had a sample taken from his nose by a state doctor who visited his house in the Hamptons. Now, this is something that came to light and is the subject of one of the multiple investigations of the governor, a legislative impeachment probe. But the Journal reported recently that federal prosecutors who were looking into the state's nursing home policies with regard to the COVID-19 pandemic are also looking at this priority testing. Now, prosecutors aren't saying what the potential criminal liability here is, Lana, but Harry Sandick, a former federal prosecutor, told us that there are possible healthcare fraud-related charges if prosecutors find that more than $5,000 has been misappropriated in some way. We should note that Governor Cuomo's office has said that it did try to secure testing for people who are close to the governor. And CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, who was very public about his infection with COVID-19 back in 2020, has said that he reached out to everybody he could for help in those days.
So has that been the official response to these claims, both from the Cuomo administration and from CNN anchor Chris Cuomo, or have they gone further in their defense?
Well, Governor Cuomo's attorneys have said that they don't believe there's any wrongdoing that has occurred. Governor Cuomo has been defiant in recent days. He says he's cooperating with these probes, but that he has done nothing wrong. Chris Cuomo was found last week, was reported to have participated in strategy sessions as his brother faces multiple inquiries. It was reported, according to people familiar with the matter, that Chris Cuomo joined his brother and lawyers and other political advisors for strategy sessions in which Governor Cuomo decided not to resign amid the scandal, but rather to push forward. We reported previously that he looked at the case of Virginia Governor Ralph Northam as a possible example and discarded the case of former U.S. Senator Al Franken, who, of course, resigned amid scandal and before a Senate ethics investigation into accusations of sexual harassment from multiple women before he was a U.S. Senator. Chris Cuomo has apologized for that. He has said it was a mistake and that it will not happen again. Both the governor and the host have acknowledged that these things occurred. In other words, they're not denying that they took place. But again, they insist that there is no major wrongdoing here.
Mm-hmm. Well, also, as mentioned, Governor Cuomo is under investigation for his handling of COVID nursing home deaths and over sexual harassment accusations. The state assembly has also launched an impeachment probe. So where do those investigations stand right now?
Well, Lana, it's hard to keep track because, as you pointed out, there are three investigations, some of which overlap in scope. Basically, the federal government is looking into the COVID-19 policies and the way the state counted coronavirus deaths that it attributed to nursing homes. We've found out, as we've reported recently, that investigation has expanded to look into priority testing. But to our knowledge, no charges have been filed. No one has been accused of any wrongdoing. The Attorney General's probe is focusing on allegations of sexual harassment. That probe is also ongoing. Attorney General James said last week that it will conclude when it concludes. But we know from reporting that investigators working with the Attorney General's office have interviewed several of the women who made complaints against the governor, now under oath. That's a sign that the investigation is moving forward. They've also talked to former administration officials and other people who may have witnessed conduct that is of interest to the investigation. The third investigation, the State Assembly's impeachment probe, is looking at everything. It's looking at the nursing home allegations, it's looking at sexual harassment, and there is frustration with some Democratic members in that Democrat-dominated House with the pace of the inquiry. On Wednesday, Assemblyman Charles Levine, a Democrat from Long Island who chairs the chamber's Judiciary Committee, said that the lawyers for the chamber had been in contact with about 75 individuals. They've received more than 200 tips through a hotline that they set up, and they've reviewed thousands of pages of documents. It's unclear when any of these investigations will wrap up, but the expectation here in Albany is that once they do, it will once again touch off a political debate about whether Governor Cuomo should be impeached, whether there will be increased pressure for him to resign, or increased pressure for him to not seek a fourth term, which he has said he plans to do in 2022.
So let's talk about that issue, because to hear you tell it, the governor sounds beleaguered, certainly, and we know that several Republicans have been looking to unseat Governor Cuomo. But actually, a new poll shows that Governor Cuomo's reelection chances and favorability have actually grown slightly, despite all of these allegations against him. So how might all of this impact his campaign strategy, and what do you put his chances at right now for actually securing a fourth term, given that he has said that he would like to do so?
Well, you're absolutely right. A poll released this week by the Siena College Research Institute found that Governor Cuomo's reelection rating, which is normally low for politicians, voters always prefer the generic somebody else to the devil that they have. It rose in the last month to 37% from 33%. The poll found that about half of New Yorkers surveyed said they didn't want to see the governor resign immediately. And of course, some viewers might know that lots of political figures in the state, including U.S. Senators Chuck Schumer and Kirsten Gillibrand, have called for Governor Cuomo to step down, saying they don't think he can effectively govern in the midst of all of these probes and investigations. But what we've seen from the governor, Lana, is a strategy of defiance, a strategy of trying to focus on anything he can that is not related to or that will not revive the talk of this scandal. This week, we saw him tour a major infrastructure project for new rail tunnels underneath Manhattan. He has made announcements regarding vaccination programs for state residents, including ones that incentivize New Yorkers to go to state parks on Memorial Day weekend. He has also loosened restrictions on business operations as the infection rates in the state have declined. So the governor's advisors say his strategy is to push on, act like he's doing the job, and just sort of present himself as a functional leader. They hope that this will blunt any of the counter charges that may come out as a result of these reports and these investigations. And we've also started to hear the governor talk about how these probes have political undertones to them. Again, setting himself up to make an argument that might not hold much water in any kind of court of law, but would certainly be beneficial if he chose to make his case in the court of public opinion starting next year.
Well, interesting to see how that case is being made right now by the governor and how public opinion is following. All right, Jimmy Vielkind, thank you.
Thank you.